Times change.
And so do opinions. I finally decided to start working on the video analyzing the worst Nen category for combat, 2 years after having made the initial one wherein I heralded Transmutation as the best combat-oriented category. However, while doing so, I realized I should probably make this video first, revising my stance on the best before I move on to the worst. Supremely briefly, there were 4 main reasons as to why I believe Transmutation to be the best combat-oriented one among the 6 categories. Reason number 1 is its proximity to enhancement. Reason number 2 is the sheer potential repertoire and thus unpredictability of Transmutation-based abilities. Number 3 is its lack of faults or weaknesses inherent to the other categories. And 4 was a cumulative case wherein I further supported the first 3 points by going over a bunch of Transmutation-based Hatsu and emphasized how unpredictable, versatile, and outright powerful they were. While I do think the arguments presented made sense at the time, times do indeed change. And as we've gotten more chapters since then, as I finally finished up the new Nen Info series, read your comments throughout the years, and in general combed over the manga and wiki like the question going after that 30-second flavor, I realized that I needed to update my opinions on this particular topic. Please note that in this video, I'll primarily be focusing on why I believe Emission should supplant Transmutation as the best combat-attuned category. If you'd like further elaboration on why I consider Transmutation to be the best in the first place, as opposed to any of the other categories, I do invite you to check out the initial video I made on the topic. There I go into detail as to why I don't consider enhancement or specialization as capable of taking the number 1 spot. And those arguments still stand. By the way, please don't be confused, this is indeed the thumbnail I used for that video. I didn't want to spoil my actual thoughts in the thumbnail itself, plus I like the whole razor holding up the Nen diagram imagery. The fact that I've now changed my mind to indeed considering Emission as the best is either extremely ironic or an act of 530,000 IQ self-subliminal foreshadowing. Without further ado, there are 2 main reasons as to why Emission should supplant Transmutation as the actual best Nen category, for combat and in general terms. Number 1. Its position in the Nen diagram is probably the best out of all the 6 categories. Just like Transmutation, it has the exceedingly beneficial privilege of being adjacent to enhancement, which, and I've used this exact phrase at least 5 times in various videos, is essential to Nen combat. Enhancement is of great benefit to any category as a baseline, with the determining factor of how beneficial it is being down to the specific ability in question and how combat-oriented it is. As in, while Leorio, Bisky, Knuckle, Kaluto, or Krollo would either greatly benefit from or absolutely need to utilize it to make their abilities or fighting styles viable, those such as Melody, Cortopi, Baze, or Neon don't need to rely on enhancement at all. This makes sense, as I don't believe it's coincidental that none of them are combat-oriented. Nonetheless, since we're not discussing specific users or abilities, but are talking about the category's capacity for combat in general, I'm counting 80% proficiency in enhancement as a tremendous benefit, as I did for Transmutation. What I believe Emission has over Transmutation is its other neighbor, namely Manipulation. While it's true that pretty much any category would kill to have Emission as its neighbor, Manipulation is an especially good fit for Emission specifically. As you're aware, the most basic and fundamental implementation of Emission is the separation of aura from one's body. Now imagine being able to borderline freely control that aura. The number of abilities you could come up with based on this concept alone is quite broad. This could entail anything from changing a projectile's trajectory mid-air, finally controlling emitted Nen beasts or other aura constructs, manipulating inanimate or animate objects from a sufficient distance, and so on. All in all, when it comes to creating a battle-oriented ability, Manipulation is a much better neighbor for Emission than Conjuration is for Transmutation. The only Transmuter I could think of who actually utilizes Conjuration as a part of a combat-oriented Hatsu was Phaeton. Phaeton conjures Painpacker, a protective suit with which he shields himself against the effects of Rising Sun, a primarily Transmutation emission-based ability. Hanzo also uses conjuration to create his clone, but considering he needs to enter a sleep-like state in order to do so, this cannot be viewed as a combat-oriented ability. I'd personally place it more in the assassination or infiltration domain. Technically, Hisoka also used conjuration in his fight versus Castro, but let's be real. His implementation of texture surprise against Castro was more of an elaborate flex and not really a combat strategy of any kind. On the other hand, quite a few emitters indeed utilize manipulation in their combat-oriented Hatsu, namely Pockle, Razor, Shakomono, Greinu, Zeno, etc. Furthermore, while we've never had the chance to see or hear about anyone going through any form of manipulation training, I have to imagine it's a reasonably more accessible category than that of conjuration. Kurapika had to put great effort in just learning to conjure his chains. This means that, apart from presumably learning the basics of conjuration itself, you also need to learn the specifics of conjuring the object in question. Unless you're a very proficient pure conjurer with a very specific Hatsu, that is. However, this is only relevant if it's something really specific that you really can't carry around with you for whatever reason. Because otherwise, you can just bring whatever the hell you'll need with you. There's no reason to go through the effort of conjuring something you already have access to, as Izunavi has noted. If you need chains for your ability and you're not a conjurer, just carry around chains with you. It's a much better idea to do that and then use your 80% proficiency in enhancement to strengthen them. The only other category that potentially rivals Emission positioning-wise is enhancement, due to it not only having an excellent neighbor in Emission, but also a very solid one in Transmutation, while also being the only category which isn't screwed over by specialization and its very much dubious placement in the diagram. It being the only category whose 80 or 60% proficiency spot isn't compromised by specialization presence, which instead takes up what would have been its 40% spot. The issue with enhancement, though, very briefly, is that it is by far the most predictable category, the users of which, if they don't want to just punch things very hard, often need to not only dip into the adjacent categories of emission or transmutation, but also very frequently into manipulation or conjuration, to make possible their more complex or creative abilities. The second main reason is that the previously argued lack of versatility in creating emission-based abilities no longer applies. This is another sentence I've used multiple times, almost word for word, so feel free to take a shot if you've heard this one before. In the last 20 or so chapters, Togashi has, for better or worse, very much expanded on the limits of the 5 regular categories. The category that has very possibly been expanded on the most is indeed emission. Apart from allowing people to fire off long-range Nen blasts, emit Nen beasts, or teleport, advanced application of emission can also allow you to phase through reality, transfer someone's thoughts to yourself via their inner voice, transfer damage and wounds to other objects or people, and so on. If we just abstract this principle of transferring thoughts or damage, we can get quite a few potential abilities only from this principle of transfer alone. Anything from emitting your thoughts to your opponent mid-fight to give them the wrong impression of what you're about to do, or full-on confuse them, channel emission or transmutation-based attacks back at your opponent, Uncle Iroh style, mirror the damage your opponent deals to you, thereby barring them from making lethal attacks against you for fear of offing themselves, and so on. Characters have even remarked in-world how they'd like to be an emitter and how emitters are highly sought after, though to be fair this is a very specific context where being able to teleport or phase through matter would be of amazing benefit. While I wouldn't say emitters have necessarily surpassed transmuters with regards to their potential ability repertoire, I'd argue they've at the very least matched them. As in, it is now unreasonable to say that an opponent would know what specific abilities to expect or what strategy to implement just from knowing or realizing an emitter's category, just as they would not be able to do so versus a transmuter. With this, Emission has, in my mind, supplanted Transmutation as the best fighting-attuned Nen category. Since it has matched Transmutation with regards to its potential ability repertoire, the determining factor which elevates it to the #1 spot is its positioning within the Nen diagram. Emission's own inherent mechanics and pure destructive ability, paired with having direct access to both the indispensable toughness of enhancement on the one side and the versatility of manipulation on the other, cements it as an unpredictable and versatile all-rounder, capable of waging combat unrestricted by range, all the while being able to keep the opponent on his toes as he considers whether the incoming Nen blasts are the extent of the opponent's ability or a mere precursor to it. Well, I just spent 10 minutes debunking myself. Amazing. Hope you enjoyed that. Seriously though, this video has been a long time coming. I've been gradually changing my mind on this for about a year now, and while I do feel confident in my reasoning, I am quite open to milking this topic further by once again having my mind changed. So if you do have differing opinions, please feel more than free to share them down below. Oh, and I probably should have clarified this at the beginning, since I did receive a few comments asking about this in the previous video, but when I say combat in general terms, I mean something akin to two parties in close or at least a general vicinity to one another, knowingly attempting to defeat each other in battle. So no assassinations, i.e. where an opponent doesn't even know they are engaged in combat, or lengthy prep times. All other factors, such as distance, battleground, knowledge, etc., can vary. In any case, thank you very much for watching, feedback is always appreciated. If you'd like to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, do consider becoming a channel member, and I'll see you in the next one. Oh, and the video on the worst Nen category for combat will be out in a week or two at most.